Welcome to VidDevo Church. We've been doing a series out in Utah VidDevo where we've gone to Antelope Island, Lake Powell, southern Utah, and going to all the different reservoirs and waterfalls, rivers, lakes, streams, recording a lot of material so that we could put it together in a package to include some various Bible teachers like Rich Chafin and Francis Chan, some music and some video recordings by Refit Revolution. They're a dance exercise team that you can enjoy the music, from like Mandisa and other people, as well as the dancing that's going on, and it's also exercise at the same time. So at Utah VidDevo, we have been taking the summer off, so to speak, to do the work that required of each one of the videos to produce them. Unfortunately, the production team and the software we're using is very complicated, and it's been taking a long time in order to produce and find the right settings for all of these various multiple parts. For instance, like a recording that's already been recorded may be in one setting, and a teaching from some other Bible teacher may be from a different type of format, and combining them makes it complicated in order to make a production of it and then upload it to YouTube, to the Utah VidDevo channel. So it's taking us quite a while to find the right settings. We've already been through 4 renderings, and each one of them has been good in some ways, but it's taken 6 hours, 4 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours, and that's quite a bit of time to produce a VidDevo. And one of the things that we liked about the early VidDevo ministry was that we just used this camcorder, or this computer recorder that we're using right now, the Orbit Sphere, and it was just poof, you record it and send it up. But it didn't have intros, and it didn't have a lot of things that a lot of people look forward to, especially if we're talking about church or we're talking about ministry. It just had devotionals, and that's what VidDevo ministry is all about. It's just video devotionals. And so today we're recording a new series that we'll try to use through the summer to discuss things that people want to know about. For instance, like church. Well, that's a good subject. Sunday, usually people talk about either going to church or not going to church. It's kind of a 50-50 with a lot of people. And one of the things you don't hear too often is someone who grew up or is enjoyed the Jesus movement as part of the church say you don't have to go to church. Well, most people will tell you you don't have to, because of course you don't have to. You have the freedom of choice. So we want to discuss that this morning a little bit, and maybe give you a little word from the Lord on daily light, which always is very insightful for what God may say to us. Because here at VidDevo Church, we like to say the Word of God by the Spirit of God to the people of God, of the Son of God. In other words, we expect God to really speak to each and every one of us individually, because after all, that is who He is. Now, who you are, you may have your own opinion, and I may also. How you interact with me and how I interact with you may be distant, it may be close, it may be personal, it may be real, it may be phony, it may be fallacy or false, it may be in a, we would say, like a business environment, or in a living environment, or in a social cause, or in a social way. We may go to and meet, say, in a nightclub or in a bar. We may be visiting in the sense of meeting in the grocery store or in the laundromat. We may see each other on the street and wave. We may just be casual. We may have friendships, may have intimate relationships. All of those are types. All of those are varieties of ways that people interact with each other. How you interact with God is basically the type of environment that usually is associated with church. Now, I find it interesting because when I was growing up, I didn't go to church. My mother apparently had come from a very devout background, that she was not devout, so when I was born, she didn't have anything to do with the church. And so I was raised with no knowledge of God whatsoever. In the Jesus movement, somebody invited me to a concert, and I went to a Calvary Chapel Riverside concert and got saved at, one of Greg Laurie's early messages, and Sweet Comfort Band was playing, and, it was miraculous what happened. I just simply said a prayer, and boom, I had these emotions, I had these experiences, I had this wonderful relationship that started from that moment on and has continued to grow over 40 years. Now, that didn't always grow inside the church. Sometimes that grew outside the church. As a matter of fact, when I first got saved, I didn't go to church. I was given a Bible and a little kind of correspondence course, which was really pretty sad in those days. I mean, it was a little white sheet of paper that asked you questions and you sent them in, and I think I filled it out and sent it in, but I never got a response. So my early days was kind of like what you would say is normal for most people. I didn't go to church. And so when I heard Chuck Smith on the radio, he was, I was living out in Riverside County, which was out by Norco. I heard him on the radio and decided that I wanted to go to that church, and it was far away, and I was a hippie, and so I got in my station wagon, an old 68 Ford wagon, and decided to move to Orange County and kind of live in the parks and, kind of do those kind of things because I didn't have any job or money at the time. And I decided to visit Calvary, and once I'd been there once, I decided to live near there. And gradually I wound up living with Christian roommates eventually, but to start with, it really wasn't like church. I worked on Sunday morning volunteering, and it wasn't quite what you call a typical church experience. That took me years later to kind of develop into, because for me, I looked at this Sunday morning kind of thing as being a little weird, and I always looked at Sunday night as being kind of wonderful. I liked going to night Bible studies. I enjoyed going to Monday or Tuesday or Wednesday or Thursday or Friday, Saturday, kind of meetings where we, studied and we learned and we incorporated things into our life and we had discussions. But I didn't really have what you would call the traditional, church experience. I had no clue what a Sunday school was. Never been to one, so I didn't know what it was. Or, things like Vacation Bible School, or for Mormons, firesides, or these other things that they do, different religions have done. Even in Jewish culture, it's like on Friday night, having we call it Erev Shabbat. It's the night before, but it's actually part of Shabbat. It starts at Friday night. And it's a great time. I mean, it's eating and talking and studying and kind of wonderful. Then you have Saturday morning, which if it's a traditional Orthodox kind of thing, they spend a lot of time kind of davening. Davening simply means prayer, and so they do this kind of stand, sit, whatever, move, do this, do that, say these things from a prayer book. The Catholics do the same, and so do a lot of Protestants. They have these certain rituals that they do that, it's interesting if you have never done it before, but I find it kind of boring if you've done it before. And that's what the problem is a lot of times for people that say they don't want to go to church. They have had some kind of boring experience that they look at church as all churches, and then they say, well, I don't want to go. And frankly, for me, I'd agree with them. We here at VidDevo Church are pretty much that way. It's, if you really don't want to go, don't go. My personal opinion is shop around. No offense, but if I'm looking for groceries and I have something I like to eat, I like to shop around to find the best price I can get for it. And if it's something I want to eat, then I buy it. But if I'm not interested, I'm not buying. And that's the way I treat church. So I don't know where you come from, and I don't know where you're going, but I know what you can do if you learn to incorporate certain practical realities in your life. If God's not real, then don't follow him. If God's not dealing with you in a personal way, don't go where you are today. That's the bottom line. If it doesn't help, don't do it. kind of common sense. It's like the guy that's beating his head against the wall. How many times do you have to beat your head against the wall before you realize that's not good for me? I think I'll stop hitting my head against the wall and try something different. Oh, okay. That's what I don't understand sometimes about people when they have this big, long argument about being in the church or out of the church or with the church or not with the church. In other words, it's pretty simple when you read the Bible. They don't necessarily show a lot of stories of people in the church. If you look at the Old Testament, dare I say, it was a direct relationship of God and man. Well, that made sense. Or God and woman. Well, that makes sense. You see, the people that are recorded in the stories in the Bible, which aren't just stories, they're actual factual history of humankind and his relationship with God, pretty much cover everything I could possibly think of in the way that most of us today don't like something about where we're going or what we're doing. If I have a pattern of behavior that puts me at odds with, say, the law, then I get put in prison. Because if I'm breaking the law, then I'm doing something that's against society. And so, because it's not good for me, I'm put away, so to speak, so that it could be learned how to deal with other people in a society that has laws. Well, God has his own society, too, that he deals with it in a different way. We call it mercy and grace for those that apply it that way. And then for people that are legalistic, they have rules and regulations, and they have laws and, denominational edicts and dogmas that they put into practice to adjust their lifestyle according to a way they want to get along. So like if you're part of a church and you want to get along with that church, you have to do what that church's rules and regulations are. Some churches, like the Mormon Church, has a lot of rules and regulations, just like the Catholics have a lot of rules and regulations. Some of the Protestant churches have a lot, some of them have less. Like Calvary Chapels pretty much have the opinion that, if you go there, then you are led there by the Spirit of God. Nowadays, it's a little less so like that than what it was when I went, but in the same format, you can come and go as you please. Most of them will either have you join by participating and getting to know the pastor or something, and they have these meet and greets, which is kind of weird, but, it's the way they do it. Or they are big enough, they don't care, and they care in some ways, but they just let you learn and then grow into it as you choose to. A lot of people enjoy big mega churches for that reason. They don't have to get personally involved. They can incorporate some of the big stuff that's going on without feeling personally challenged by it. Sometimes things like Joel Osteen's ministry or some other kind of feel-good, speaker-type environment does that. I know a lot of churches here in Utah are very oriented towards not pushing anything on you because they want to make you feel good, as opposed to what was taught here for a long time about be good. There's a lot of kind of spoiled children mentality here of wanting to get what you want when you want it without having to invest anything cost-wise. Now, I don't think that the Christian church correctly uses money, so I don't, in our VidDevo church, involve ourselves in any money. We just give, we don't get. So I can't tell you about tithing and all that stuff because a lot of people, they use that for a lot of variety of reasons that I might not agree with them. But as far as just the church is concerned, if you don't want to go, don't go. And that's what the point of this message is today. If it's helping you, then go where you get help. In other words, if it's a benefit to you, if you're getting a return on your investment, if you are going to a place where you have to sit and listen and not participate, then you have to decide if it's a waste of your time. I personally think you're wasting your time if you're just listening without participating. In other words, if you have to sit in a pew or sit in a chair or sit in what you do and watch, and you get to sing with the singers, and the worship kind of team and community. Well, that could be a benefit, I guess, if that's what you get out of it. You could have a lot of sing song, singspiration as they call it, or sing along kind of kumbaya stuff. But I think you could get that at home as easy as you could get that in church. So you see, I have a higher standard or criteria that I have if I was going to go to a church. I don't want to be a part of some sing-along that I could watch at home. So if you're a millennial, or if you're someone who is like me that wants a return on your investment, choose wisely where you're going to spend your time. If you don't want to, like on a Sunday morning, go to church, don't go to church. There is so much available on the internet that I would tell you, make use of your wisdom that God is trying to talk to you, and say, look, if God wants to talk to me, then he should be able to meet me where I'm at. Maybe I can look up some of these things on the internet and check it out before I go about doing things I don't want to do. And that's what I recommend to everyone when it comes to church. If you don't want to go to a church, don't. But make sure you learn about God somewhere. Make sure you start to study to understand the things you're either missing out on, or you're learning and you're still about those things without having to be in those things. Do you see what I'm saying? In other words, if the Old Testament had lots of people who were outside the church talking directly to God, you don't have to be inside the church in order to talk to God. God can talk to you, and you can talk to God anywhere, any place, anytime you are where you are. Some religions were started based upon that principle. They said they were talking to God, and personally, I look at them and I say, really? What kind of God were you talking to? Because, if you're talking about someone like Buddha or Muhammad or some of the other, kind of earthy languages or earthy religions, I kind of look at it and go, well, was your God a tree? Some of them are kind of weird, and I go, that's not exactly what appeals to me. I'm not a tree hugger like we used to say in the 70s or in the hippie movement, because I found that was just a fallacy. It wasn't true. It wasn't following God, really. It was just learning to want to, save the planet or save the whales, or getting involved in these, issues, rather than behind the scenes getting involved with who created them in the first place. And if you're kind of like a science buff and you're anti-creation, fine. Go ahead. Prove it. That's what you should do. Prove whether God exists to yourself, not to everyone else. Don't argue with anyone. Just find out for yourself what is the facts, and then deal with God on that level. In other words, if you have a family, you have to usually get along with your family or get divorced. That's the bottom line, is that if you're married and you have a relationship with your wife or a girlfriend you married or you're living with, then on a daily basis, I got news for you. You have to deal with that relationship in some way. If you live in America today, you have to deal with the relationship of society. One way or another, if you have a car, you have to deal with traffic laws. If you have a job, you have to deal with expectations at your job in order to get paid. Well, the same thing's true about life in general. The older you get, the more you realize there is, frankly, God, period, and that you're going to deal with that in some way, one way or another, before you die. You're going to either feel terror or absolute denial. One way or another, you're going to be afraid of the fact that you don't know what's on the other side of death, and you don't want to die. Or you're going to, kind of like say, well, it just doesn't, I'm not worried about it because I'm in denial. I don't care. Well, you do. No one, according to what the Bible says, can deny the fact that they have a knowledge of God inside. A little bit, God gives them some kind of what they call saving grace, or some kind of little bit of knowledge that they can use that to learn more. They can open the door, so to speak, of the internet and study and learn, and maybe go on wrong, tangents for a while, maybe learn some bad things for a while, maybe go into a wrong religion for a while. But if they keep learning, they're growing. And that's why we say here at VidDevo Church, we don't care if you're a Mormon, a Catholic, a Protestant, Jehovah's Witness or anything else, you're learning. If you're learning, you're growing. And just like these plants that can't help but grow in the summer, I mean, if I water these little suckers, they're going to explode all over this porch. Oh, wait a minute, they already have. Well, if I water them, they're going to blossom. Oh, wait a minute, they already are blossoming. Well, you get the point, is that they automatically grow. They only need a little bit to really turn into what they were meant to be. You don't need much. You don't need to have a church. You only need, really, for you to be you. You need to learn the way you learn. You need to understand the way you understand. You need to have a God that actually will reach out and speak to you personally, or else don't go into that church. Don't go into that religion. Don't follow that way of life. Because if it's not working out for you, just like the old expression says, I like to look at people and say, well, they'll tell me their story, and I'm, sort of interested. I'm really not, because I've already been where they're at, and I always kind of go, well, how's that working out for you? Because I already know. I mean, I look at them and they're not happy. They don't smile a lot, they're not walking around joy-filled, they're not walking around like, man, this is cool, I'm digging it, this is wonderful, I just love waking up every day. People all the time, you can tell where they're coming from because, frankly, they look like they are where they're coming from. They're oppressed, depressed, sad, burned out, bummed out, getting their latest fix either from politics or religion or, something they're getting a fix from, because they just have pressure in life that they want to get away from. I don't know too many people that would come out on their porch, like this porch, and sit down and kind of look at this wandering Jew plant and see the light passing through this leaf, and notice the sparkling kind of undergrowth of it, how it's sparkling in the light, and noticing all the little hairs that are standing on top of this leaf, which kind of makes me think of myself because I got all these hairs on my arm, and kind of like, think about that for a while and kind of think, well, I could either look at that and say it evolved. Frankly, I think I'd have a real problem with evolution. Or I could look at somebody created it, but why, I don't know. But, it makes sense, creation. Kind of like, huh. And if God did create it, and it's got all that intricate detail, then I look at myself and I know I have some pretty intricate detail. And if God's that real in creating that much of detail, then I think I want to get the details of life from Him. Because if He can answer, I want Him to answer. If He can speak, I want Him to speak. If He can talk, I want Him to talk. And that's why you don't have to have church, but you can use church for what it was meant to do. It's meant to be a school, an education, a place of learning, not a place of doing. In other words, a lot of people get involved in religion at church as opposed to what church was intended for it to be, a place to meet God. I mean, frankly, if you wanted to meet, someone in, say, a nightclub, you have certain expectations if you go to a nightclub. I would think they would be music, drinking, and dance, and, unless it's a concert. And so your expectation of going to a nightclub is to either have fun, get drunk, or, meet someone, or have a relationship, or do something. In other words, there is something that you expect when you go into a nightclub. When I go into McDonald's, I expect to be able to order a hamburger. Now, if I went into McDonald's and tried to order Kentucky Fried Chicken, I don't think I would get chicken. I might get McDonald's chicken or chicken McNuggets, but I'm not going to get Kentucky Fried Chicken inside of McDonald's. At least not that I know of. So when I go into a different variety of fast food restaurants, I expect whatever's on the door to be what I get. Kentucky Fried, I expect Kentucky Fried Chicken, and McDonald's, I expect McDonald's food, Burger King burgers, those kind of things. Now, that's kind of what it does with churches. You kind of expect what you get by the name, but nowadays they're trying to confusing that, so it's kind of weird, but still you get the idea that you can get a variety of food that all is still fast food, and you get to enjoy it according to what you like. So if you don't like where you're at, if you are going to church, go somewhere else. Make a benefit to the people that you're around and go somewhere else. But say you don't want fast food. Say you want to cook at home. God has never said you have to go to church. There's no place in the scriptures that say you gotta go or you gotta do. As a matter of fact, it says those that assembled themselves together for some reason, they got together in order to break bread. In other words, some of the pressures of society were so great that they got together in order to share in need. People were hungry, so they shared in the breaking of bread. They had all things in common. They sold their goods and celebrated kind of a communal existence. They decided that Jesus had taught them something they wanted to follow and do the same way he did it. They wanted to be like Jesus, not like the church. In the day that the early church began, they were still a part of Jewish culture. They were still a part of Judaism. They were members of a sect of Judaism called the Way. People that followed the way of Jesus, the halachot, the way that Jesus said to get to God or to know God. Because that's really what church is supposed to be about. It's supposed to be an education process, a place of learning where you get to know God in a personal, intimate way. That's what Jesus came to do and to say. He said, look, I get you got a temple. I get that you got problems, like Roman, kind of taking over the country, and you got these political issues where you want to be free from Roman rule. Well, I got a better way. I got something that will change you on the inside and influence you on the outside. Now, everything else is going to force you into being a certain way on the outside, but I can change you on the inside. And that's why it's not about going to a building or going through some rituals or going through some practices that you do on a Sunday morning, but it's about what's going on inside you. If you're sitting in a pew doing your religious duty, God's not going to honor you. I mean, he's not going to say, hey, well done, thou good and faithful servant. You went to church every Sunday. He doesn't have an attendance record. You see, he's more about developing a personal relationship with you than he is about you developing a relationship with the church. We say here at VidDevo Church that we want to share Jesus in an intimate and personal way because what Jesus said about eternal life was something a little peculiar compared to what most people think eternity is. He said that this is eternal life, that they should know me and know him who sent me. Well, according to Jesus, God sent him. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life. Well, if God sent him, then Jesus was doing what God, his Father, sent him to do. And he often said that, I'm only doing those things I see my Father doing. I only say those things my Father has told me to say. I find that interesting that it's his Father he's always talking about. In church, if you find people talking about other things, that's probably because they're talking about religion more than they're talking about relationship. Me personally, I don't care where you go. I don't care what you do. What I do care about is who you know. If you have a personal relationship with Jesus, I don't care if you're Mormon, a Muslim, a convent, or a, Catholic or Protestant or whatever. The point being is that God is the one who's trying to get through to you, not me. I don't care whether you go to VidDevo Church or you go down the street to a Calvary Chapel or you go up the street to a temple or whatever you do, or a synagogue or, anything you choose to learn from. I pray you may be learning about God himself as opposed to religion. Now, if you want to add religion to your relationship, that's okay. Every man has a religion. Some people religiously watch football, then baseball, then soccer, then soccer being foot soccer, not the other soccer, and then, other things, whatever it may be. Or they may participate in Ironman competitions or Their religion may be, running and hiking in the state of Utah. Like we go out into the outdoors, because we are, VidDevo Church. Utah's only all outdoor church. We film everything outdoors because we don't like being confined indoors. I think that sometimes people think of God as being in a box and he's only in the church. So we go outside the church in order to have church. And that's what you should be doing in evaluating whether or not in this particular series you need to go to church or whether you want to go to church. Because you see, what we want to say to you at the end of this study is the same thing we wanted to say at the beginning of it. You don't have to go to church. If you want to, then go to what you want to do. If you want to sleep in, sleep in. God's not going to hold that against you because, oh my God, you missed a Sunday morning? Who cares? Sunday morning is for unbelievers, really. Nowadays, most churches focus in only on Sunday morning because they don't have people that will participate Sunday night or any other night of the week. Where I came from, we were so excited about what we were learning, we went 7 days a week. At least I did. And that was 7 nights a week. Sunday morning, I kind of volunteered to do something about what I was learning. So I just worked behind the scenes, kind of like, janitorial work, so to speak, in the tape lending library. But still, the point being is that what you want to do is what you should do. Until God changes what you want to do, you're not going to like what you're doing. You're going to be one of those sourpuss, you've heard that word, sourpuss. It's somebody who has their face all screwed up, kind of like, they're happy. They tell you, yes, I'm happy. I'm thrilled. I'm so excited. Or they get all wrapped up into, like the first 5 minutes of church, which is usually singing, or unless it's announcements. But, most churches have a pretty program. But, they get their 5-minute worship in, then they have to sit through something they don't want to do. Sit through kind of that long lecture, kind of like what you're hearing right now, or that long, what do they call it besides lecture? Like a lecture. Churches today call it a expositional teaching because you go, if you're interested, you kind of go, oh, well, I didn't know that. Now, you can't say that out loud, but, you think it in your mind and you write down notes, and you listen to what some guy like me, is standing up in front of you, kind of like in front of a camera, telling you what he's learned for you to be provoked into learning on your own, but you're not gonna, but you want to learn what he learned so that you think you're learning because that's the way they do it nowadays. They preach at you rather than teach, which is supposed to be giving you the tools to learn on your own. We here at VidDevo Church like to say that, me being the guy kind of in charge, that God wants me to, do this, we preach because we admit that's what we're doing. We're preaching. We're not teaching. If you wanted to be taught, I would say, come on over and we'll sit down and talk and see how God will lead you. If God speaks to you when I'm talking to you, we compare notes and say, hey, check it out. Let's together work on this and see if God will talk to you direct. And maybe open a Bible together and see what it says, and if it's God speaking to you and you figure it out, hey, that's God. That's one way God talks to you. Maybe you want to talk about it in counseling and you say, well, every time I do this, then these circumstances happen. Well, that's kind of like a reaping and sowing thing. So I would say that's one way God speaks to you, through circumstance. Some people call it kismet, which is kind of silly, but, they call it that. Some people call it like, chickens come home to roost, which is kind of stupid, but okay. It's really the principle of you reap what you sow, but okay. But God can use circumstances to speak directly to you. He can speak directly to you audibly like he has to me. Some people, God does speak direct because Jesus said he would. Jesus said, my sheep hear my voice, not my word written, but my voice. And they know me and they won't follow the voice of another. A lot of people that are anti-hearing God because they've already heard God in some way, they'll say, well, you're hearing voices in your head. Well, yeah, I am. Praise the Lord. I'm going to listen to that voice too because as long as it's true, I'm going with it. Dare I say that, they're not going to stand with you in heaven when you have to deal with whether or not you heard God speak. I do, and I have, and so that's why I'm not afraid to say, yeah, you better believe it. I know, for me. Now, I'm not telling you to follow, anything. I'm just telling you what you learned from God personally is what's going to apply to you personally. you'll be accountable and you'll be responsible. I'm not accountable to you. I'm only responsible for sharing with you the facts so that you can determine the truth for yourself. So in all of those things that we're talking about this choice you get to make, this individual response to a living God, this reality of either God is real and you're willing to admit that and deal with it, or you're willing to deny it and go to hell. Because, bottom line is, you got a heaven and hell kind of situation at the end of your life. When you're dead, you don't get a choice. When you're alive, you have a choice. What you choose to do with that choice is up to you. God's long-suffering. He'll let you go, he'll give you a lot of rope, and leeway. And you probably get away with a lot of rope-a-dope, kind of hanging out on the, have you ever seen that in boxing? I don't know if you know what rope-a-dope is, but Muhammad Ali kind of made it famous where instead of going out there, and just throwing, throwing haymakers, where you knock some guy out, and that's what you usually think of as boxing is a big giant fight where two guys get out and just beat the snot out of them until one of them's knocked out. Well, that's not what boxing is today. Matter of fact, there was just recently, I guess, a great big world's greatest boxing match came up. It was so many rounds, and then they determined by, the number of points, when someone won. It wasn't always that way in boxing, but that's the way it is today. And I guess it was considered the most boring boxing match in the world, too, because nobody knocked each other out. But the guy that won wound up, because he had longer reach, scoring more points because he just kind of kept tapping the guy, hitting him in the face, and he got points for that, or hitting him in the body, he got points for that. And the little guy couldn't get close enough to, knock the guy out. So, dare I say, that's one way of seeing what it's like, when it comes to fighting or arguing or debating or, going about something that isn't what you thought it was. And that's kind of what it's like with, God using circumstances. Your life could beat you up quite a bit. But if you're staying distant, you're not really getting close to God. If you're staying far away, you're not really delving with the reality of sometimes when you think you're going to watch the greatest boxing match in the world, you get let down and it's not what you thought it was. Maybe that's what's happened in your relationship in life. A wife let you down, a job let you down, people let you down, because you thought it was one thing and you had this expectation where it turned out to be something else, and it was kind of like, ew, that's not what I thought. I thought it would be like this. Well, God, in one way, wants to show you you can have great expectations and he won't fail you. God wants to involve you in something that's beyond your comprehension to such a degree that it's so great you can't fathom what it is or who he is or how much, in fact, that he does love you. You could say that, your wife loves you, but if you've ever been through a divorce, that didn't last. You could say that your kids love you, but as soon as they're old enough to be teenagers, you kind of question that. When eventually they die or they're gone, that love isn't there anymore. But there is something and someone who goes beyond comprehension, beyond death, beyond life itself. And believe it or not, that's who Jesus said is your Father. You see, that's kind of what the church doesn't teach a lot about anymore. Your Father. You have someone who actually is not your biological, donated some sperm, and if you're, an illegitimate child like I was, you think, well, so what? Yeah, so you're my Father in heaven. Who cares? I had a father on earth and not much to speak for. Well, that's not what God says. God says, look, I created you for myself. I created you to have a relationship with me. I want you to experience what I am as I am, the way I am. Because I already know how you are, the way you are, as you are. And you're not real happy about it. You're not real satisfied with it. You're not content in going through what you're going through. Well, after 40 years of kind of knowing that message, I can tell you this. I don't know what you want out of life, and you're going to go after it no matter what it is, because if you're living in America, you're going to get a lot of things that look good, like the fight last night, or feel good, like maybe a worship experience, or, kind of you tried out some, new sexual partner, or you tried out some designer drug and it just didn't work out so good in the long run, that it was all short-term feelings and not a long-term effect. God, in my 40 years, keeps getting better, not worse. It keeps getting better and better, not lesser and lesser. Oh, sure, I mean, I've done things where it's been stupid, where I've gone, God, I don't see you as intimate as I used to. What happened? Where did you go? And he goes, no. You went somewhere. I didn't go anywhere. I'm always here. You went somewhere. And then I have to admit, well, yeah, I got involved in this, that, or the other thing. And that kind of affected my personal relationship. And that's why people go to church a lot of times to learn about relationships, about the consequences or the involvements of the things they're attached to. Like, why should I get involved in politics? Well, there are churches that push politics, and frankly, I think they're stupid. Every 4 years you got to change, every 2 years you got to change, every year you got to change. Politics just divides. It's not something that Jesus said, but it is something the church will say. Most of the churches right now want to argue about marriage and claim that God said when they didn't. God said that marriage is between a man and a woman. No, he didn't. Because if that were true, then we've got a problem with, Jacob, marrying 2 women. We have a problem with David having multiple wives. We have a problem with, quite a few people in the Bible that didn't get the message. Dare I say, Jesus speaking at that time said, from the beginning it wasn't so, that for this cause shall a man leave his mother and a woman leave her home, and the two shall become one flesh. He didn't say that with marriage. He said that's one flesh. I don't know how to explain this to you, but dare I say, there may be something more to this made-up excuse than the reason why they're using it to hide behind doing something that isn't what God said. Because really, a Christian marriage or a godly marriage is something that's with God in it. Now, I can deal with that. If God is in my marriage, then I have to deal with God in the marriage. But if God isn't in my marriage, then it's an ungodly marriage. And I can say, okay, let people have ungodly marriages. They do it every day. There are husbands, wives, and children from marriages that are, what they call heterosexual marriages, that grow up and have done so for generations that have nothing to do with God. Seriously, they, for whatever reason, have continued on in that generation to generation to generation and ignored in their life God, period. Now, is that any better than, what they're saying nowadays with, 2 men and 2 women, whatever they're doing, I got news for you. It's not about the marriage. It's about your relationship. So, I'm not going to tell you that it's okay for 2 people, that are, heterosexual or homosexual or, LGBT to do what they're doing. I'm going to tell you there are costs and consequences to everything everyone does. If I do those things, like I said, if I go into a McDonald's and I try to order, Kentucky Fried Chicken, I'm not going to get it. If, dare I say, 2 men get married and they want to have children, they're not going to get one of the men pregnant. It just doesn't work that way. I can't get chicken out of McDonald's. I can get Kentucky Fried Chicken. Now that's kind of processed. And 2 men, if they want to process, the long-term adoption and everything, yeah, they can have babies, but not by way of gestation and having, someone of a male type environment pregnant. Sorry, that's not the way God created people to be. And so that's where you get into the cost and consequence. It's not about the issues they argue about, which is religion, but it's about the relationship. Does that person know God? Now, I'll admit, there are people that are pretty confused, like Bruce Jenner or other people that do a lot of transgender stuff, and I have no idea what they're going through. I don't claim to know what they're going through. I only want this to be known for them. If they have a relationship with God, they're dealing with it. They're dealing with one-on-one, alone, with God in some way. Maybe they go to a transgender church and they're, trying to get chicken out of a, McDonald's, or maybe they're trying to get McDonald's out of a Kentucky Fried Chicken. I don't know. I only know this. When I deal with God personally, I'm responsible personally. If I was trying to pass the buck, then I would blame it on someone else. Like go to a church that I could blame it on. So when we talk about church and whether you have to go, you don't have to go. But there is one thing you have to do. You have to, in some way, be responsible to you. No, really. I mean, we're not talking about church now, because the series is about, really, to put it bluntly, accountability. The fact is, most people that don't want to go to church, it isn't because they don't like to or they don't want to. It's because they resist this idea of accountability. I personally like accountability because when I do something, I know I did it. Like if I write a story, I know my own story writing ability. I look at it, I enjoy it. I'm a skilled writer in a lot of ways, so I enjoy my name on what I did. Now, I don't like, kind of like, going about doing something and then suddenly be, like, say, falsely accused. If someone says I did something and I didn't do it, I'm not so thrilled about that. Now, maybe, it's a good thing where, maybe somebody made a mistake and they gave me a bunch of, money, and you'd say, well, okay, I'll take it. Well, maybe not me, but you might, and, you kind of get credit for it, and you take it and you enjoy it. Fine. But what if it's something like, say, someone accuses you of breaking the law? Oh, wait a minute now. I don't want to be falsely accused. I don't want to be falsely imprisoned. I don't want to falsely go to jail. I want to be accountable and responsible for what I do. Now, of course, if you're the one that broke the law, you are accountable. That's the way it works. Well, that's kind of the pros and cons, or the yes and no, or the positive and negative of being accountable. You're only accountable for yourself. I mean, in some ways, you're responsible for other people, but you're not accountable. You're accountable for your personal life, of your own life, as you will one day stand before God alone. And frankly, you can do what you want then. You can explain it. You can maybe justify it. Maybe, talk about it. You can have it out with God then. I personally think you should do that now before you get there, so you kind of got an idea what it's like going into a court of law. Because frankly, God kind of deals with it however your mindset is. You're not going to come out of it on the positive end, but you think you will, so it's fine. Do whatever you're going to do. But you see, that's the difference between going to church and not going to church. It doesn't matter, that part. Nobody cares. You, though, should care about you. And some of us care what you do with you. We care enough to say, fine, you don't have to go to church, but learn something from somewhere, someplace, at some time. Use the internet. Use videos or VidDevo. Use like ministries like VidDevoChurch even, that we present a lot of material out there from a variety of sources that you can learn on your own, so that you'll have some idea of what this accountability is. It's not a preacher standing up and saying, you're going to hell unless you do this. Well, yes and no. I mean, he's really trying to say something to you to shake you up, to make you think about what you're doing. That's all. There's a lot of mercy and grace God has for you, and a lot of love that, will cover a multitude of sins. Unfortunately, there's also something that we know doesn't cover you when it comes to eternity. And that means if you don't have that relationship that gets you into eternity, you're going to go to hell for eternity. And frankly, there's, kind of like a membership at a door. If you got a key and you unlock the door, you can get in. But if you don't have a key, you have to try to break in. And Jesus even said that in a parable. He said the thief tries to break in the house, but the owner of the house walks right in the door. And he says that's what it's like for you if you'll accept his way of doing things. You can walk right in the door. You can walk right into heaven. You can walk right into the presence of God and talk to him. You could, believe it or not, I mean, you're going to think this is shocking, some of you religious people, but you can argue with God. I mean, I do. Abraham negotiated. Moses argued. I mean, bluntly, That's what's going on in the Old Testament. People talking to God and presenting their case in this life directly, one-on-one. Now, if that's true then, what's wrong with now? And that's why we tell you you don't have to go to church. But you better be dealing with someone, talking to him about something that involves you, or you're going to find out accountability is a mother if you don't know what you're doing. In other words, I like being accountable for what I'm doing. I know full well when I've done wrong, and I know full well when I've done right. And I don't have one that outweighs the other. I only have one thing that I ever talked to my God about: mercy and grace. Grace is simply being given, extended something that God says, I'm going to have mercy upon you. And I'll go, I'll take that. I'll take grace. I like grace. Grace, I can get forgiven for. Grace, I can deal with mercy. Grace, I can deal with love. But if I get judgment for what I've done, I know enough about me to know that in me there dwells no good thing. If you give me any moment in time, I know my own sinful ways and nature, so I'll probably go the wrong way rather than the right way. And that's kind of why today we wanted to talk to you about the church. We wanted to talk to you about the right way. So when you choose to not go to church, do it the right way. Don't go to church because you think you have to, then don't go to church. Don't go to church because it's part of your religion, don't go to church. Don't go to church because it's part of your whatever, think you have to, want to, whatever. If you don't want to, don't go. But if you want to, then go. But if you don't go, then do it the right way. Find something, someone, a book. Maybe, you don't have to do it on Sunday morning, but sometime during the week, read a book. If it's a Bible study, read a Bible study. If it's something that inspires you in the direction you should go, then let that be a starting place to continue to bring you to a place of getting to where you want to go. Because where I want to go is where Jesus is. And he said something interesting about learning about him, is that if I would learn about him, then he would be able to help me to get where I want to go. But if I don't, then it's kind of like being out on the trail and asking someone, is the trail washed out, or is it still, going, and you ignore the directions? Well, then you wind up lost in the wilderness, so to speak, or you wind up falling off a cliff, or, getting hurt out in the outdoors. It just doesn't work unless you learn to recognize the signs that are there. Like if it says, don't go on this trail because it's dangerous. Well, if you go and you get hurt, that was your fault, your accountability. That's what Jesus was trying to say most of the time when he talked. He said, look, yes, of course you got freedom. Your yes, no, yes. This is my teaching. If you do these things, you'll be blessed. If you don't, this is what happens. Your life will suddenly discover that there's major things you can't handle. And when they happen, it's your fault. You weren't prepared. And I warned you to be prepared. That's what Jesus' basic teaching is on everything in life. Sermon on the Mount is a direct application of all of that. It's not some kind of pie-in-the-sky idea. It's a practical reality of how to live your life. So, in wrapping this up about learning how to not go to church and the fact that you don't have to go to church, let's give you a little word from the church. A little bit of encouragement about not having to go, but having to deal with someone who wants you to know him in a personal, intimate way. And that is God. And that means I'm going to read this little kind of excerpt, this little portion or part of the Bible. It's something that's just, hey, if the Spirit of God is in you, which he probably is, or he's outside of you and he's probably working on you, then he'll make it fit or not fit, whatever part does, for you. See, that's how God works. He doesn't want you to look at the sunshine and say, well, that's nice, I'd rather be in dark. Or look at the darkness and say, I'd rather be in the light. He wants you to learn what the light is for and learn what the dark is for. And that's the same thing true about the Spirit of God when it comes to hearing some things. If you feel uncomfortable about it, maybe there's a reason. You can talk to God about it. Don't talk to me about it. I'm going to tell you, probably what you don't want to hear. But if you want to hear what God has to say, that's usually what most people want. So we like to include a little portion or a little part of the Bible in everything we do at VidDevo Church. So This morning it says, be ye perfect, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. I am the Almighty God. Walk before me and become perfect. You will be holy unto me, for I, the Lord, am holy and have severed you from other people. I have made you mine. You are mine. You were bought with a price. I purchased you. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which is God's, because God has bought you. God has purchased you. God owns you. You're complete in Him, which is the head of all principality and power. He is in charge. God is in control. God, who gave Himself for us, that He might redeem us from all iniquity, has purchased us with the blood of His only begotten Son. Be diligent that you may be found of Him and in Him, with peace and with love, in joy without spot, and blameless before all men. Blessed are the undefiled in the way, who walk in the law of the Lord, whoso looketh into the perfect law of liberty, that though they may do anything they choose to do what God tells them to do. Continue therein in that relationship of knowing and listening and doing what God tells you to do. He, being not a forgetful hearer, but a doer of the word, is a man that shall be blessed in everything he does, for he follows and walks after God. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my thoughts, and see if there be any wicked way in me, and then teach me of that, and help me and lead me in the way that is best for me. Perfect holiness in the fear of God is learning to cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of flesh and spirit. Therefore, if you desire truth in your inward parts, and in the inner part that is hidden, then have need to show you the wisdom that I can give you. If any man lack wisdom, let him ask of God, who upbraideth not, but giveth to all men liberally, teaching us that denying ungodliness and worldly lust, we should live soberly, righteously, and godly in this present time, especially in these latter days. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father which is in heaven. Not as though I had already become perfect, or that I am perfect, or that I will be perfect, but when He comes, I will be perfected. Every man that has his hope in Him purifies himself, even as He is pure, as much as he does cleanse himself from dirt, from the stain of the things that is going on in the world and of the world. Now he that hath wrought us the selfsame Spirit that He has given to us to hear what He has to say is God, who also has given to us the deposit, or that with which is inside of us, of His Spirit, which teaches us all things, for the perfecting of the saints, and for the work of the ministry, and for the edifying of the body of Christ, is what God does in us, and with us, and for us, and to us. For it is God who is at work in you, both to do and to will of His good pleasure. You know, when you hear all that spiritual stuff, you probably go, I'm bored. I'm tired. Well, good. Because that's how it can be sometimes when you sit inside of a Sunday morning service and you're listening when you don't want to listen, or you're hearing when you don't want to hear, or you're doing what you don't want to do. Take it at your pace. Learn at your race. Set the pace in the race according to what you are learning to do, not according to what someone tells you to do. Anyone can tell you to go to church, but not too many people can tell you not to go to church. And not too many people can tell you to go to God, where you should be, whether you're in church or outside of what we call the church.